bring out the...
Hold on. There's no witness check.
What's that?
No until the witnesses are here.
We don't have witnesses to one trial. We don't have witnesses to one. Just do all things. Go ahead and bring out the jury.
Folks, as you noted, and this is for the jury, this courtroom is a little smaller than the one where we actually selected the jury. It'll be a little bit crowded, but what I'm going to do as the case goes on is I'm going to rotate you every day one seat over here, so you folks at the end aren't always at the end, so every day we'll rotate one seat over, okay? Before we get started, however, I need to swear you in, so I need for all you folks to stand up at this time. Raise your right hand. You swear or affirm that you will arrive at a verdict according to the evidence and the law contained in the instructions of the court. You may be seated. Before I give you the main instruction, I'm going to give you a brief instruction regarding cameras in the court. Ladies and gentlemen, cameras are allowed in the court of this state under certain guidelines. In order to not distract you, they will be located in designated areas of the courtroom. In the event any member of the jury is distracted by any member of the news media, you should immediately advise this court. The news media has been instructed not to film this jury or any member of the jury whether in or out of the courtroom. The cameras may be allowed to photograph the testimony of certain witnesses and not others, or only portions of testimony of some witnesses. You are not to draw any inferences or conclusions whatsoever from this fact. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to read you a somewhat lengthy instruction. Just pay attention, because I will only read it one time. As you folks know, my name is Judge Eichel. I'll be conducting this trial. My bailiff is Mr. Earl Chavez. He's been here with you. He'll be assisting you throughout the trial. My court reporter is Sandra Silva. She takes notes of everything that is said here in court. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a criminal case commenced by the state against the defendant, Andrew Romero. The defendant is charged with the following crimes. Count 1, open count of murder. Count 2, tampering with evidence. Count 3, tampering with evidence. Count 4, shooting at or from a motor vehicle. Count 5, conspiracy to commit armed robbery. Count 6, aggravated fleeing a law enforcement officer. Count 7, concealing identity. And count 8, false evidence of title and registration. The defendant is presumed to be innocent. The state has a burden to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant is guilty. What I will say now is an introduction to the trial of this case. As the trial begins, I have some instructions for you. These instructions, along with others previously given, are preliminary only and may be changed during or at the end of trial. All of you must pay attention to the evidence. After you have heard all the evidence, I will read the final instructions of the law to you. You will also receive a written copy of all instructions. You must follow the final instructions in deciding this case. This trial is expected to last approximately 3 weeks, as we discussed yesterday and the day before. The usual hours of trial will be from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. with a lunch break and an occasional rest break. Unless I give you a different starting time, we will start at 9 a.m. and you'll report to the jury room by that time. Please do not come into the courtroom unless you are called in by the bailiff. And for purposes of scheduling, as I instructed you folks yesterday, we'll have court today, tomorrow. We will not have court on Monday of next week or Thursday of next week, and on Friday of next week we will have court till around 1 o'clock, 1:30, and in that time frame. That Friday we won't have a lunch. We'll just work through the lunch hour. That'll be next Friday. You are allowed but not required to take notes during trial. No paper will be provided for this purpose. Notes should not take the place of your independent memory of the evidence. When taking notes, please remember the importance of paying close attention to the trial. Listening and watching the witnesses during their testimony will help you assess their appearance, behavior, memory, and whatever else bears on their credibility. At each recess, you must either leave your notes on your chair or take them with you to the jury room. At the end of the day, the bailiff will store your notes and return them to you when the trial resumes. When deliberations commence, you will take your notes with you to the jury room. Ordinarily, at the end of the case, the notes will be collected and destroyed. A criminal trial generally begins with the lawyers telling you what they expect the evidence will show. These statements and other statements made by the lawyers during the course of the trial can be of considerable assistance to you in understanding the evidence as it is presented at trial. Statements of the lawyers, however, are not themselves evidence. The evidence will be the testimony of witnesses, exhibits, and any facts agreed to by the parties. After you have heard all the evidence, I will give you final instructions on the law. The lawyers will argue the case, and then you will retire to the jury room to arrive at a verdict. It is my duty to decide what evidence you may consider. Your job is to find and determine the facts in this case, which you must do solely upon the evidence received in court. It is the duty of the lawyer to object to questions, testimony, or exhibits the lawyer believes may not be proper, and you must not force such objection against the objecting party. If I sustain objections, if the question or evidence sought is improper I will sustain objections if the question or evidence sought is improper for you to consider. If I sustain an objection to evidence, you must not consider such evidence, nor may you consider any evidence I have told you to disregard. By itself, a question is not evidence. You must not speculate as to what would be the answer to a question I have ruled cannot be answered. It is for you to decide whether the witnesses know what they are talking about and whether they are being truthful. You may give the testimony of any witness whatever weight you believe it merits. You may take into account, among other things, the witness's ability and opportunities to observe, memory, manner, or any bias or prejudice that witness may have, and the reasonableness of the testimony considered in light of all the evidence of the case. No ruling, gesture, or comment I make during the course of the trial should influence your decision in this case. At times, I may ask questions of witnesses. If I do, such questions do not in any way indicate my opinion about the facts or indicate the weight I feel you should give the testimony of the witness. Ordinarily, the attorneys will develop all pertinent evidence. It is the exception, rather than the rule, that an individual juror will have an unanswered question after all the evidence is presented. However, if you feel an important question has not been asked or answered, write it down on a piece of your notepaper and give it to the bailiff before the witness leaves the stand. I will decide whether or when your question will be asked. Rules of evidence and other considerations apply to questions you submit and may prevent the question from being asked. If the question is not asked, please do not give it further consideration, do not discuss it with other jurors, and please do not hold it against either side that you did not get an answer. There are a number of important rules governing your conduct as jurors during trial. You must decide the case solely upon the evidence received in court. You must not consider anything you may have read or heard about this case outside of the courtroom. During the trial and your deliberations, you must avoid all news accounts of the trial, whether they be on radio, television, the internet, or in any newspaper or other written publication. You must not visit the scene of the incident on your own. You cannot make experiments with references to the case. You as jurors must decide this case based solely on the evidence presented within the four walls of this courtroom. This means that during the trial, you must not conduct any independent research about this case, the matters in this case, and the individuals or corporations involved in this case. In other words, you should not consult dictionaries or reference materials, search the internet, websites, blogs, or use any other electronic tool to obtain information about this case to help you decide this case. Do not try to find out information from any source outside the confines of this courtroom. Until you retire to deliberate, you may not discuss this case with anyone, even your fellow jurors. After you retire to deliberate, you may begin your discussions of the case with your fellow jurors, where you cannot discuss this case with anyone else until you have returned a verdict and the case is at an end. I know that many of you use or have cell phones, the internet, and other tools of technology. You must also not talk to anyone about this case or use these tools to communicate electronically with anyone about the case. This includes your family and friends. You may not communicate with anyone about the case on your cell phone or other devices that can access the internet, through email, text messaging, on Twitter, through any blog or website, through any internet chat room, or by way of any social networking website such as Facebook. During your deliberations, you must not communicate with or provide any information to anyone by any means about this case. You may not use any electronic device or media such as a telephone, cell phone, computer, or any device that can access the internet service, or any text or instant messaging service, or any internet chat room, or by way of any other social networking website such as Facebook, to communicate to anyone any information about this case, or to conduct any research about this case until I accept your verdict. Until you retire to deliberate the case, you must not discuss this case or the evidence with anyone, even with each other, because you have not heard all the evidence. You have not been instructed on the law, and you have not heard final arguments of the lawyers. If an exhibit is admitted in evidence, you should examine it yourself and not talk about it with your other jurors until you retire to deliberate. It is important that you keep an open mind and not decide any part of this case until the entire case has been completed and submitted to you. Your special responsibility as jurors demands that throughout this case, you exercise your judgment impartially and without regard to any sympathy, bias, or prejudice. To minimize the risk of accidentally overhearing something that is not evidence in this case, please continue to wear the juror badges while in and around the courthouse. If someone happens to discuss a case in your presence, report that fact at once to a member of my staff. Although it is natural to visit with people you meet, please do not talk to any of the attorneys, parties, witnesses, or spectators either in or out of the courtroom. If you meet in the hallway or the elevator, there is nothing wrong with saying a good morning or a good afternoon, but your conversation should end there. If the attorneys, parties, and witnesses do not greet you outside of the court, or they avoid riding in the same elevator, they are not being rude. They are just carefully observing this room. Witnesses, other than the parties, the representatives of the state, and expert witnesses, will wait outside of the courtroom until they are called to testify. Witnesses may not talk to other witnesses while waiting to testify. The lawyers are responsible for monitoring their own witnesses to ensure they do not enter the courtroom. The prosecuting attorney may now make an opening statement. The defendant's attorney may make an opening statement or may wait until later in the trial to do so. What is said in opening statement is not evidence. The opening statement is simply the lawyer's opportunity to tell you what the lawyer expects the evidence will show. At this time, the state will make their opening statement.
And Your Honor, before this, excuse me, I would invoke the exclusionary rule. This time. I don't think there's any witnesses in the courtroom, but just
It'll be both throughout the trial.
Your Honor, permission to move about the welcome court.
You may.
Good morning.
Good morning.
May 25th, 2015. It was Memorial Day, a holiday. It was a cool day outside, jacket weather, and it was right about 8 p.m. It was right about that time that Officer Benner pulled onto Southern Avenue in Rio Rancho and pulled in behind the gray Dodge Durango with the license plate 331 RAT, 331 RAT. As you'll hear from other officers, he randomly ran the license plate. And officers do that on occasion. They're checking for compliance with registration laws. He ran the license plate and it came back as a skip plate. Now, skip plate, that can mean all kinds of things, but it can mean that you didn't pay your registration. It can mean that the license plate doesn't belong to that vehicle. It can indicate that this might be a stolen vehicle. So he turned on his red and blue lights to pull this vehicle over to investigate further. The vehicle pulled into the parking lot of the Albertsons right at Southern and Pine Tree. And it pulled in next to the Arby's. The officer got out, walked to the driver's side window, and spoke to the occupants of the car. Inside the car was a female driver and a male passenger. The female driver provided Officer Benner with all of her information, her driver's license, her name. The passenger also provided a name and a date of birth. He gave the name Albert Fresquez and a date of birth in October of something. The officer took that information and went back to his vehicle, and he ran it through dispatch. And dispatch advised him that yes, this ID belonged to Tabitha Littles, and yes, her information checked out. Dispatch also advised him that Albert Fresquez did not belong to that date of birth. So the officer knew that he wasn't given correct information. He went back to the vehicle and he informed the passenger that I know that I've received wrong information. Please give me your information again. And the passenger said, I've already given you my fucking information. So the officer thought, okay. So he walked around the vehicle and he went to the passenger side. And the window was up and the passenger wasn't rolling it down. And he tried to open the door, but the door was locked. And the passenger had kind of turned around in the seat. And it was about this time that the passenger reached over, pulled down the gear shift, and told Tabitha Littles, drive, bitch. And she did. She put her foot on the gas, and she drove, while the officer was still standing there. The officer ran to his vehicle, jumped in, and followed. The vehicle didn't drive very far. Just around from that entrance of the parking lot to the one around on the other side. This entrance faces directly into a post office, and a library. The vehicle stopped, and as it did, Tabitha Littles exited the driver's side, and she fell, and she was sitting on the ground. The officer leapt from his vehicle and headed toward her, and as he was doing so, he said, "Are you okay?" And she indicated that she was. So he now focused on the Dodge Durango. The passenger, the male passenger, had now moved to the driver's side of the vehicle, and he was throwing things out of the driver's side. Things like Tabitha's purse, Tabitha's phone, and he was in the driver's side. Officer Benner ran toward the vehicle, and as he was doing so, he pulled the handcuffs from his duty belt. Now, this is, like I said, about 8 p.m. on a holiday. We're talking about a library and a park and a post office and Albertsons and all of the businesses around there. So there's quite a few people that are all around there. And they're all seeing what's going on from their own vantage points. So, from those people's statements and from the evidence that was left at the scene, here's what we know. We know that there were 4 shots. We know that there was a pause somewhere in there. So maybe it was pop, 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 pop. Maybe it was pop, 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 pop. But there was a pause. We know that Officer Benner never pulled his gun. We know that 3 of the 4 shots struck Officer Benner. So we know that 1 shot, in no particular order, hit Officer Benner in the right shoulder, in the back of the right shoulder. It went through his shoulder blade, and the bullet was lodged in the soft tissue of his right arm. We know that a bullet struck his right leg, behind his knee, just below it, over to the right. That bullet went through his tibia, which is the long bone of the lower leg, and then exited. And we know that another bullet hit the left shoulder, the back of the left shoulder, that it entered. It pierced his lung. It went through the sac of the heart. It went through the atrium of his heart. It went through his diaphragm. It went through his liver. It damaged the diaphragm again, and then it lodged in the right side of his chest cavity. Officer Benner was 49 years old on May 25th, 2015, on the day that he died, from 3 bullets, shot from behind, shot from the gray Dodge Durango, from the driver's side, from the man holding the gun. Now, we know that all of this took place a little over a year and 3 months ago, and that had happened in Rio Rancho, Sandoval County, New Mexico. And we're here in Valencia County, quite a ways away from that. So, here we are. And the reason that we're here is because Judge Eichwald made the decision that there was too much excitement in Sandoval County over the case, and that it should be moved. So that's why all of you are here. So this is where we are. We're at the Valencia County Courthouse. But I want to make sure that you know where this happened. So, if you were to leave here and go up I-25, and you would head up toward Albuquerque, going past the Big I, which is right there. And if you continued north on I-25, and you got to Alameda, and then you turned and went west, then you would be headed toward Rio Rancho, and here's Cottonwood Mall. Some of you know that Alameda goes just north of Cottonwood Mall. And then the road turns, and it goes north, and right about here you're entering Rio Rancho, and right there on the right-hand side is Intel. Now just past Intel, a few streets, you get to Southern Boulevard. And if you turn east again, or excuse me, west again, this is the area that we are talking about. And just down here is the parking lot of the Albertsons and the post office and the library. But we're going to talk about this entire Southern Boulevard corridor. Now, Officer Benner's day started like it usually did. He got up, he put on his uniform, and he went out to serve and protect the people of Rio Rancho. Tabitha Little's and Andrew Romero's day started very differently. And what you're going to hear is that the decisions that Andrew Romero made and the choices that he made took them to a Taco Bell in Albuquerque. And this is the Taco Bell on Gibson and San Mateo. And at the Taco Bell there on Gibson and San Mateo, Tabitha Little's waited in the gray Dodge Durango with the license plate 331 RAP. And Andrew Romero went inside with a gun, and he robbed the store and took their money. He then came out, and what we know next is that sometime later in the day, Andrew Romero made the decision that they were going to travel to Rio Rancho to find another place to rob. And Tabitha Little agreed with that. And so they made the trek up to Rio Rancho. Now, later in the trial, Judge Eichwald's going to give you instructions, like he said, and part of those instructions are going to be the elements that we have to prove for each crime that Andrew Romero is charged with. So, one of the crimes that he's charged with is conspiracy to commit armed robbery. So when we present to you the evidence that shows that they made an agreement to go to Rio Rancho, what we're doing is we're presenting to you the evidence to support the crime. Oh, to support the crime of conspiracy to commit armed robbery. But you're going to get those instructions and you won't be lost, and you'll be able to follow along and you'll be able to see what evidence we're presenting that support that charge. Okay? So, they left their Taco Bell and they traveled up to Rio Rancho, up to the area that we are talking about. Now, about 7 o'clock in the evening, Officer Benner went on a call at Southern and Country Club. And if you look over to the right-hand side of the screen, you can see the Albertsons. And so we're right there, right in the area. So it was about 7 o'clock at night. He goes to his call, and then about 10 minutes till 8, we know that Tabitha Littles entered the Bolero station. And this is just down the road from the Albertsons. It's to the west. And she enters the Bolero station, and you'll hear from the clerk how Andrew Romero stayed outside, pumped gas. And that she went inside and she wandered around the store and acted a little suspiciously, but she ended up buying some Cheetos with some cheese on top of it, and I don't know what else. But the clerk's going to tell you that she recognized her later on as the person involved in this, and she contacted the authorities. So we know what time they were there. They were there about 10 minutes till 8. Okay? About this same time, Officer Benner had moved on to another call. And the other call was just south and west of here in this neighborhood right here below Southern. And they went to Danzig. And at this stop, he was with another officer. He was with Officer Kyle Kraniak. And Kyle's going to come and he's going to talk to you and tell you about that call and what he remembers about it. One of the things he's going to tell you is that as they were leaving, he was teasing Officer Benner. He was teasing him and telling him, dude, you get off at 8 o'clock, go home. Go home to your wife. Now, why is that teasing? Well, because they had spent the last few days in Red River. The Rio Rancho Police Department goes up to Red River and they patrol during festivals. And Red River likes them, so they call them to come back. So the Rio Rancho Police Department, several of the officers were down in Red River, and they were talking about, hey, are you going to come back next year? Hey, how about you? Are you going to come back? And Officer Benner, in front of many, many officers, indicated to them that he was not going to. And in some way, he told them that he wasn't going to come back because he missed his wife too much. And he needed to go home. So this was the very next day, and they're at Dan's night, and he's getting ready to get off work, and so Kyle tells him, you're getting off. Go home. Go home to your wife. So they leave, and they come up to Southern Boulevard, which is the road up at the top here. And they start to go west. No, east. I have got my directions completely messed up today. At the same time, like I said, Tabitha Littles was at the Bolero station. They leave the Bolero station and they go west. And they travel just past Unser Boulevard. Which is the big road there going north and south. Once they get past Unser, they turn around and they head back. And what you're going to hear is that the reason that they were heading back is because right next to the Bolero station, there is a Twister's Burritos. And they had decided that that was their target. So they were coming back to go to the Twisters. However, Officer Benner pulled out from Danzonite up onto Southern Boulevard, and he pulled in right behind them. And when he did so, he ran the license plate. He found that it didn't come back. So here we're talking about the charge of false evidence of title or registration. He pulled in, he turned on his lights. Now, Kyle Kraniak was following him. Kyle saw him. He saw him pull in behind the Dodge Durango. And he saw the Dodge Durango. And he knew what he was doing. He knew, oh, Benner can't stop. And he went ahead and pulled him over. And Kyle turned off and went a different direction. But he knew there was a traffic stop. So Officer Benner pulled in behind them. And this is the Arby's. Right here, where they pulled in and they stopped. So, right about here, Officer Benner calls in the information to dispatch. And dispatch tells him that the information is not good on the passenger. And he confronts the passenger. And he makes the drive around the parking lot. And they end up stopping at this exit. This exit right here, and here's the library, here's the parking lot, and the post office is over here somewhere. And this is a park. So Officer Benner is behind and they pull up. And he gets out. And there are multiple witnesses in this parking lot. There are multiple witnesses in this parking lot. And they're all watching what's happening. The officer's vehicle was about here. Witnesses say that the defendant's vehicle was about here. So, after Officer Benner gets shot, one of the witnesses that's there runs to his car and gets on his radio. And he yells into the radio, "Officer down, officer's been shot." So this is broadcast to the entire police department and dispatch. Kyle Kraniak is south of here. He had just gotten coffee and he had pulled over somebody else, but he hears this radio transmission. And at first he thinks, this is a joke. Because I think it had happened once before, right? He thinks, I think this has happened before. So he's like, no. But then he looks and he realizes that the transmission came from his coworker, his friend, Officer Benner's radio. And he knows that because you can see the number that the radio is coming from. So he jumps in his car and he drives to the scene. And by the time he gets there, there's a direction of travel on the vehicle and he follows it. At the same time, another officer, Officer Gabe Sanchez, is at the Rio Rancho Police Department. He also hears the call. And he runs for his vehicle. And he has the presence of mind to turn on his lapel camera. So, and you're going to get to see that. So what he does is he turns on his lapel camera, he jumps in his car, and he races for the scene. Because he doesn't know, but he knows what the civilian has just said. And that's that an officer is down, an officer's been shot. He gets there, he jumps out of his car, and he runs directly for the group of people that is standing in the middle of the road. Now, those of us that have not committed our lives to protecting and serving our community and being police officers, teachers, and social workers and scientists, if we were to come across our coworker, our friend, bleeding to death in the street, we could fall apart. We could run in the other direction. These police officers, and Gabe Sanchez in particular, and you're going to see, he ran toward it. And he tried to give assistance, and he tried to stop the bleeding. And you're going to get to see what he saw. And you're going to see Officer Benner lying there, lifeless. You're going to see that he has blood coming from his mouth, coming from his ears. You're going to see the life-saving efforts of all of the people involved, because there were some off-duty EMTs there, right across the street, and they were there within seconds. And they were giving CPR and all of the life-saving attempts that you would expect to see. And Gabe Sanchez and every other officer that arrived did what they could to help. Then the ambulance arrived, and they took Officer Benner away. But what you're going to see is that Gabe Sanchez immediately, from that, gets up. He goes to his vehicle. He gets out crime scene tape. He starts taping off the area. He starts asking people, were you here? Stand by my vehicle. Were you here? Stand over there. I need to interview you. Stay here. And he separates people. He starts telling other people, go get this, go get that, stand here. I need a pile of witness statements. And he starts taking witness interviews. And he starts doing his job. And you can see that on his lapel. Now, what you're going to hear is that the vehicle took off very quickly from the shooting. You're going to hear about tire marks on the ground and lots of evidence from people that know a lot more about it than I do. Experts that will be able to tell you about it. All the other evidence that was there. And what we know is that the vehicle turned and went west on Southern again. But then it turned and went down Sarah. And Sarah is this road right here that turns and kind of goes catty corner down here. So the vehicle very quickly pulled out, went up here, turned, and as a matter of fact, it went down the wrong lane right there because it's a really sharp turn. So it turned, it went down the wrong lane, and Enrique Lewis was crossing the street here. And Enrique is going to tell you that the vehicle came barreling down the road, narrowly missed him, and that he was able to see the vehicle clearly, was able to see some of the details about that. You're going to hear from him. What we know next is that the vehicle somehow traveled through the neighborhoods, down toward Albuquerque, and then it ended up near this intersection, which is Unser and McMahon. Let me back up one here. We'll go. Okay, so this area is right behind the McDonald's. And as you can see, the neighborhoods here are all cul-de-sacs and turns, and the vehicle was pulled in here, and it was parked right about here. And right next to this is a walking path. And the walking path heads out here and goes to this empty lot and heads to the businesses down there, or maybe toward Unser. It's not very far from Rio Rancho where all this took place, but it is kind of off the beaten path and into this neighborhood. So the vehicle is left here. Now, the evidence about where the vehicle was found and everything regarding that is going to go toward the charge of tampering with evidence, because that vehicle was evidence of the crime. So driving it in here, parking it, all of that, we'll be presenting all of that to you to support that charge. Now, the next thing that we know, well, let's keep going. Oh, here's another view of where the vehicle was located, right here on the side of the road, in front of that house. So there are multiple agencies involved in this. Multiple agencies show up at the scene, and the decision is made that state police are going to take over the investigation because it's one of Rio Rancho's own. So it makes sense that state police would take over the investigation. But there's also other agencies. Bernalillo County Sheriff's Department, APD, lots of police agencies, right? They all come together to help. So there's this massive hunt, and everybody is doing what they can to find out all of the information that they can about what's going on. So eventually, later in the night, what they find out is that they are looking for Andrew Romero. And they find out an area of Albuquerque where he may be, and officers from multiple agencies are following and looking and trying to locate him. And eventually, they come across a car, an Impala, that they believe that Andrew Romero is in. And all of that is police investigations, and we're going to hear from several officers that were involved in that hunt, involved in finding him, etc. So they get a vehicle that they believe that he's in, and they start following it. And eventually, what they find is the vehicle goes to the Shell gas station here on Rio Grande. It's just south of I-40. And officers are right there because they've been following the vehicle. And one officer in particular, Mitch Bingston, he's going to tell you that he was right there, and what he saw was Andrew Romero run from that store and jump into the passenger side of that Impala that was sitting outside waiting. And then what you'll also hear is that just a few seconds later, the call came in from that store that they'd been robbed. So officers are following, and the vehicle travels through some neighborhoods and ends up going up to I-40. And then the vehicle travels down I-25, and that may be kind of hard to see, but this is I-25 right here. So they're driving down I-25, and the order comes in for the officers to go ahead and try to pull over that vehicle. So they turn on their lights, and they go to pull over the vehicle, but the vehicle doesn't stop. The vehicle keeps going. So they pursue. And eventually, the vehicle goes off on Rio Bravo to this Valero station here at Rio Bravo and I believe Broadway. The vehicle pulls into the parking lot, and as it does so, it makes a U-turn around the pumps. And when it does that, something gets thrown out of the passenger front window. So they go to investigate, what is this thing that has been thrown out of the window? And they find the gun. It's a gun. It's been thrown out of the car. And they mark it and they collect it. Now the gun is sent to the state crime laboratory, and they do testing on it. And all of the evidence from the scene of the shooting, that's all been sent over there as well. And what they find is that the casings from the original scene match the gun that was thrown out of the car. And again, you're going to hear from people that know way more about that than I do. And they're going to tell you why they know that those casings came from that gun. Andrew Romero was taken into custody as well as the other two people in the vehicle. And in his pocket, there's a Dodge Durango key. And then they locate the Durango. Now, evidence of that gun being thrown from the vehicle, that's going to be in support of the tampering with evidence charge as it applies to the gun. Because again, a gun is evidence of a crime. I think what I've missed here. So, He's taken into custody, and you're going to hear from multiple people about that and about the investigation. And at the end of this trial, we're going to end up coming back to speak to you again. As a matter of fact, we're going to come back and we're going to talk to you twice. And we get to do that because the burden of proof is on us. It's all on us to prove to you the elements that make up all of these crimes. And the burden is beyond a reasonable doubt. And you already talked to about that a little bit. But beyond a reasonable doubt is not beyond all doubt. It's not beyond reason. It's reasonable doubt. Now, you all came in here with your life experiences. You all came in here with good judgment. You all came in here with your common sense. And at the end of this trial, when we come back and talk to you, we're going to ask you to use those things, to use your good judgment, to use your life experience, to use your common sense. And we're going to ask you to return verdicts of guilty for all of the charges that Andrew Romero is charged with. So, we're going to ask you to return a verdict of guilty for concealing ID. We're going to ask you to return a verdict of guilty for false evidence of registration. We're going to ask you to return a verdict of guilty for shooting at or from a motor vehicle. We're going to ask you to return a verdict of guilty for aggravated fleeing. We're going to ask you to return a verdict of guilty for tampering with evidence as it pertains to the Durango, and tampering with evidence as it pertains to the gun. We're also going to ask you to return a verdict of guilty for conspiracy to commit armed robbery. And finally, as to the open charge of murder, we'll be asking that you find that this crime was committed with deliberate intent. And because of that, we'll be asking that you return a verdict of guilty for first-degree murder against the defendant, Andrew Romero, for taking the life of Officer Gregg Benner. Thank you. Thank you, Judge. Rid of this. Thanks. You're going to turn the podium? Thank you. Maybe. There we go. I think that's good enough. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for your time yesterday and for your time and attention today and as we move through this trial. No one is going to argue that Officer Benner's death isn't a tragedy. Absolutely. When anyone dies, as many of you stated in jury selection, when anyone dies, it's a tragedy. When someone who has been charged, who's voluntarily taken on the responsibility of protecting us, dies, it's a tragedy. Yes, we all agree with that. But don't allow the fact that it's a tragedy cloud your vision, cloud your judgment, or allow you to lessen what the state has to bring to you as proof beyond a reasonable doubt. The tragedy exists, but the state still has to prove their case. It is the prosecutor's job to prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt that Andrew committed these crimes. It is the government's job to put on witnesses that will testify, credible witnesses, believable witnesses, that will testify to convince you beyond a reasonable doubt that Andrew committed this crime. And you're going to hear from every one of them. And one of the very important witnesses that the state's going to put on is Miss Tabitha Littles. You've heard a little bit about her so far from the state's opening. Miss Tabitha Littles was the person driving that Dodge Durango that day. She was the one behind the wheel. Tabitha was the one who got pulled over by Officer Benner. Tabitha's the one that didn't have the plates that had Officer Benner stop her to begin with. And it's Tabitha who's going to point the finger at Andrew. And you're going to hear a lot about Tabitha and her credibility. you're going to hear how first, when Tabitha is at the scene that the state just showed you at this Albertsons parking lot, that she made up a story about how she got there, a big story. A story that doesn't match anything else. You know what? It wasn't a story. It was a lie. And you're going to hear Tabitha tell you that initially, to a number of law enforcement, a number of emergency personnel that were there helping Officer Benner, she told them a lie over and over. And what that lie was is that she didn't know who Andrew was. She said she was driving down the road and she was carjacked. That she saw someone on the side of the road who needed assistance. She stopped. And that somehow they got inside her vehicle at gunpoint and forced her to drive. And that she started to drive erratically or sort of swerve around so that she'd be pulled over and saved. And that person who supposedly carjacked her was Andrew. That's a lie. Andrew was her boyfriend. And they were driving together that day with Andrew in the passenger seat. So Tabitha lied that day to a number of people. Why? She lied that day to protect herself. Because she knew there was big trouble, and she was part of it. And so she lied that day to all these people so that she could save her own hide. And that she's the one that's pointing the finger at Andrew. She's going to say she lied because she was on drugs. Well, use your common sense on that. She managed to come up with a lie to save her own hide that doesn't indicate she was too confused about what actually happened. Then you're going to hear the deal, the plea deal that Tabitha got to take the stand and say Andrew did it. We're going to spend a lot of time on that because she's the one that's pointing the finger here. And Tabitha Little's got the deal of a lifetime. You're going to hear about this deal. You're going to hear that Tabitha does what she needs to do to get herself out of trouble, and that there's only one thing Tabitha cares about, and that's herself. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you've been selected to be on this jury. As you know, we went through quite a process with you yesterday and the day before, because you have shown that you can look at the evidence fairly, that you can be impartial, that you can hold the state to their burden, make them prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt, and understand that there's going to be this gut reaction to the evidence, to the loss of life. Of course, we're all human. But that gut reaction, that emotion is not proof beyond a reasonable doubt. The state has to prove those elements, all of the elements of each crime, to you beyond a reasonable doubt. Not only do they have to prove that Andrew was the shooter, but they also have to prove that Andrew had the intent to kill that day. The state has asked you to find him guilty of first-degree murder, deliberate intent to murder. And you're going to see that there's an instruction on how you can come to that conclusion of deliberate intent. And what the government has to prove to you is those elements of deliberate intent beyond a reasonable doubt. That there was careful thought, that there was calculation, that there was weighing of the consequences. The government will not be able to prove that piece. They will not be able to bring a witness that can prove that element to you beyond a reasonable doubt. It's your decision, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, to decide who shot Officer Benner. And the evidence that the state brings you will not be sufficient to convict Andrew Romero of these crimes. When you're back there and you're in the jury deliberation room and you're thinking about what the state brought, and you're finding yourself having a hard time making a decision, you don't have to fight that. If you're not satisfied that they didn't bring enough, if you're not convinced that the government didn't bring enough, that's okay. That's reasonable doubt. And it's at that point, ladies and gentlemen, that you must acquit Andrew Romero. It is at that point that you must find him not guilty. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to break until 1 o'clock. But before you leave, I've written the instruction before, the recess instruction. I'm going to read it again to you and pay close attention to this instruction. I'll remind you of the instruction at given times. I won't always read it, but here's the recess instruction. It's very important to follow this. During recess, do not discuss this case with other jurors or with any other person, or allow anyone to discuss the case with you or in your presence. You as jurors must decide the case based solely on the evidence presented here within the four walls of this courtroom. This means that during the trial, you must not conduct any independent research about this case, the matters in this case, and the individual or corporations involved in this case. In other words, you should not consult dictionaries or reference materials, search the internet, websites, blogs, or use any other electronic tool to obtain information about this case or to help you decide this case. Do not try to find out information from any source outside the confines of this courtroom. Until you retire to deliberate, you may not discuss this case with anyone, even your fellow jurors. After you retire to deliberate, you may begin discussing the case with your fellow jurors, but you cannot discuss the case with anyone else until you have returned a verdict and the case is at an end. I know that many of you use cell phones, the internet, and other tools of technology. You must also not talk to anyone about this case and use these tools to communicate electronically with anyone about this case. This includes your family and friends. You may not communicate with anyone about the case on your cell phone or any other device that can access the internet, through email, text messaging, on Twitter, through any blog or website, through any internet chat room, or by way of any other social networking websites such as Facebook. During your deliberations, you must not communicate with or provide any information to anyone by any means about this case. You may not use any electronic device or media such as a telephone, cell phone, or any device that can access the internet, any internet service, any text or instant messaging service, or any internet chat room, or by way of any other social networking website such as Facebook, to communicate to anyone any information about this case or to conduct any research about this case until I accept your verdict. Avoid any publicity this case may receive. Do not read, listen to, or watch any news accounts of this trial. Do not express your opinion about this case or form any fixed opinion until the case is finally submitted to you for your decision. So folks, on occasion I'll just remind you of this instruction. Let's break for lunch and be back by 1 o'clock. All right? Just follow me. Okay, and I'll speak to the table by around 5 to 1 and have your witnesses available. We'll get started at that time. Okay,
Okay, thank you.
Give you recess until then.